Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Miracles of Tragedy. Before we get underway and I introduce my guest for today, I want to quickly talk about something that my daughter has done. She has put together an anthology book called Love Lingers Still. She has some things written in there along with some other authors and there's a couple of them who are best-selling authors. It's a book about, as she calls it, a haunted anthology of lost loved ones. It's when, if you've lost somebody close to you, a lot of times they'll be remembered just by a scent. It makes a memory come back, or whatever it is that triggers a memory, whether it's a memory that you just laugh at or a memory that makes you cry. That those lasting things that just they linger for the rest of your life. And you can find that at Amazon. If you read, not if, but when you read this book, if you don't cry, then I don't know what to tell you. We'll just have to have my new guest come over there and smack you upside the head today or something. Anyway, my new guest, Frank King, today, the mental health comedian. Now, Frank, how on earth does that work? A comedian dealing with mental health and suicide. I don't get it.
Well, I think it's a good choice to tell you why.
Okay.
Because if you think about it, the world's first comedian was a court jester. A court jester's job was to speak truth to power on behalf of the powerless with humor. I believe I speak truth to the power of mental illness on behalf of those often powerless in its grip with humor. I believe
Okay.
where there's humor, there's hope. Where there's laughter, there's life. Nobody really dies laughing. And depression and suicide run in my family. It's called generational depression and suicide. My
Okay.
grandmother died by suicide. My mother found her. 9 years later, my great aunt died by suicide. My mother and I found her. I was 4 years old. I screamed for days.
Oh,
And if you're that close to an actual suicide and you're already hardwired for depression and suicide, the chances of you seriously considering taking your life sometime later in life go up. And in April of 2010, following a Chapter 7 bankruptcy in the last recession, I learned what the barrel of my gun tasted like. Spoiler alert, I did not pull the trigger.
that's good.
I say that, and the audience nervously laughs. And I said, a friend of mine came up to me at a keynote recently, and he goes, "Hey, man, how come you didn't pull the trigger?" I go, "Hey, man, could you try to sound slightly less disappointed?"
Yeah.
That's where the humor is in this topic. It's not jokes. It's not a joking topic, but
No, it's not.
funny personal anecdotes.
Yeah. It's, and a lot of people, they think, with depression still has such a stigma attached to it.
Yes, and so does suicide. And by the way, that's a separate stigma.
Yes.
Depression is one stigma, thoughts of suicide another stigma. Now, I live with major depressive disorder, better known as depression, not situational generally, just like a flat spot on a wheel. It comes up every so often, lasts about 72 hours. And then I have something called chronic suicidal ideation, which is far more rare. It's not even in the DSM-5, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of the big book of psychological diseases.
Okay.
I have said out loud to clinicians, more than one, I have chronic suicidal ideation, and they stare at me like a pig at a wristwatch. They've never heard of it. So it's what it means is for people like me, my tribe, the option of suicide is always on the menu as a solution for problems large and small. And when I say small, a couple of years ago, I said to the audience, my car broke down. I had 3 thoughts unbidden: 1, get it fixed; 2, buy new; and 3, I could just kill myself. That's chronic suicidal ideation. Now, Collin, here's the upside of telling that story every time. Almost every time I've spoken since 2014, there's been at least one person in the audience, sometimes more, who have chronic suicidal ideation. They do not know it has a name. They think they're just some kind of freak and completely alone. I did a college show. A young woman came up and said, "Thanks for the keynote." I said, "You're welcome." She goes, "But I got to tell you, it made me weep." "How did it make you weep?" She goes, you know your story about the car, get it fixed, buy a new one, kill yourself?" I go, "Yeah." She goes, "I've been having those thoughts all my life. I thought I was just some kind of freak. I thought I was all alone. And when I heard you say that out loud, that you have that, and it's a thing, I realized the first time in my life I'm not alone, and I wept." So that's the
Oh,
power of starting the conversation.
that's powerful. That is. So but you've been a comedian, was it like over 30 years now, correct?
37 years.
37. Yep. The talk I watched, you said 33. So that was 4 years ago. See, I can actually do math in my head really
Which
quickly.
is amazing.
I know. So, and before you started uh, giving keynote speaks about mental health and suicide, what was the premise of your stand-up
It was
routine?
very observational, like Seinfeld, sort of.
Uh-huh.
Just funny things that happened to me, real things. With rent a cars and airline flights and ex-wife, and just good, solid, clean. I did clubs. Started in December, the day after Christmas, 1985.
Okay.
I said to my girlfriend, now my wife, 35 years, I'm going on the road to be a stand-up comedian full time. Do you want to come along for the ride? Thinking she'd go, oh hell no. And she goes, yeah. So we gave up the apartment, our jobs, and got my little tiny Dodge Colt, and we took off. And we were on the road working clubs. I worked. She just came along for the ride for 2,629 nights in a row, 7 years and change.
Holy cow.
Yep, from 85 to 95, and worked with people who are famous now: Seinfeld, Dennis Miller, Foxworthy, Ron White, Ellen, Rosie, Steve Harvey, Adam Sandler, Kevin James, back when they were just comics. It was an amazing time to be in comedy.
Yeah.
And then after the club scene began to disappear, because I was clean, I had clean comedy, I thought I'll do corporate comedy after dinner, after lunch at conventions. And
Right.
somebody asked me, what's the difference between a club comic and a corporate comic? Well, it's about $5,000 a day plus travel. I'm no math major, but that made sense to me. So
Yes.
I rode that horse until about the beginning of the recession, 2007 and 8. And then bookings dropped off 80% practically overnight. Now, when the conferences and conventions came back, meeting planners said, frankly, we love you, but we can't pay you just to be funny. You got to teach our audience something. I'm like, well, what
Okay.
am I going to teach? And I realized, because I had 2 mental illnesses, came close to suicide. And as I told you off the air, there are more nuts in my family than in a squirrel turd. That if I got some training and certification in suicide prevention, I could keynote on that. So I got several certifications. And then, next problem, Colin,
Mm-hmm.
I've been a comic for 25 years. Who's going to believe I can do anything serious? So that's when my wife said, do a TEDx. And I said, what's a TEDx? And she told me. And just by chance that week, I got on a mailing list somehow, and a TEDx sent me an application. So I filled it out, and I got it. And I
Mm-hmm.
did a suicide prevention TEDx. And by the way,
Yes.
like many people with mental illness, nobody knew. I'd never told anyone that I lived with depression, thoughts of suicide, came close to killing myself until I got on stage at TEDx and came out of the mental health closet on stage on YouTube. And when my wife was getting ready to push the button on YouTube, I said, wait, I need to tell you half a dozen things you don't know about me that I don't want you to learn watching the video.
Right.
And then 2 TEDx events saw my video, liked it, and said, do you have any more mental health topics? So I go, yeah. So I did 2 more by invitation, and I did, let's see, that's 3. And then 4 more I applied for. That's 7. Number 8, because I have a big presence on LinkedIn, I got an invitation from a TEDx event in the state of Assam, India. And they said, we love your take on mental health. You're the only person we've ever heard say anything positive about mental illness. And would you do a virtual version of a TED talk on the upside, the positive side of mental illness? And I said, absolutely. It's called I'm Not Broken, I Was Made This Way. Because I believe that my depression, thoughts, suicide are simply the flip side of my sense of humor, creativity, imagination. And that's the premise of the talk, is that I keep meeting people who have a mental health challenge, but they have some other amazing ability. And I thought, this cannot be a coincidence.
Right.
Same brain, same wiring. So, and then my 8th one, I don't know if you know this, but TEDx now has performers in addition to speakers.
Okay.
So because I coach TEDx, I thought I can't be submitting applications to speak because my clients are submitting applications to speak. I would be competing with them, but I could apply as a comedian. And I thought nobody's ever going to book me. But 2 weeks ago, I was in Hamilton, Ontario, just southwest of Toronto, and I did a TEDx, and I did stand-up comedy. I was one of the performers. So, but there was some mental health in there because the theme was legacy, and I talked about how my using humor and vulnerability to talk about suicide prevention, I believe, has saved lives. So I believe I'm leaving a living legacy. People who might not still be alive had they not heard me speak.
Now, where can somebody find, especially this last TEDx that you're talking about?
Well, the last one's not up on YouTube yet.
Oh, okay.
But 4 of them are. Just type in Frank King and TEDx, you'll find 4 of the talks. The next 4, they refuse to post.
Oh,
well, because you're not supposed to have that many. Yeah, they don't like me. They hopefully when I did it as a comedian, hopefully number 9 because I'm doing comedy and not speaking, they'll post it. But yeah, they don't. It's kind of like being a card counter at a blackjack table in Vegas. It ain't illegal, but they don't like it. I've learned how to game the system, and I've probably had 36 clients of mine get TEDx, some more than one. As a matter of fact, in Hamilton, Ontario, when I was performing at the TEDx, one of my clients was speaking at the TEDx. So it was nice. I'd never met her in person. We always Zoomed.
mm-hmm.
So yeah, TEDx. And so what I've done, Collin, is after the first time they wouldn't post it, I realized, okay, I'm going to have to figure out a way to get a bootleg copy of this. So what I've been doing is I'll say to the committee, hey, I'd like to donate a videographer to the event and record everybody, and I'll turn the raw footage over to you guys. They're thrilled because they get another camera angle. What they haven't tumbled to yet is I do that because I own the video, and I can get a bootleg copy of mine that I can put on Vimeo, not YouTube.
Okay.
And slice and dice for promotional purposes. So
Okay.
I'm a learner. I'm a slow learner, but I am a learner.
Gotcha. Okay. So now you said you get certified.
Yeah.
Where did you go to for these certificates?
I took a class called Working Minds, Suicide Prevention as a Workplace Health and Safety Issue, a 1-day, 8-hour class with a woman, by the way,
mm-hmm.
who is one of the co-authors of the 4 books we did on men's mental health. And then I studied, there's a curriculum called QPR, Queen Paul Romeo, QPR Institute.com. It's a 10 or 12-hour class, and it's a curriculum on suicide prevention. I did a train the trainer. When you do the 12 hours, you're doing the train the trainer class.
Okay.
And then assist, which is applied suicide intervention, something training. I didn't get a train.
You're gonna have to send all this to me later. I was going to try and type it into the banner, but I'll never follow all that. I can subtract something real quick, but I can't do all that.
Yeah, assist is ASIST. It's another curriculum like QPR.
Okay.
So, and then I took, and I would recommend your audience do this if they want to learn about mental illness, is something called mentalhealthfirstaid.org. Mentalhealthfirstaid.org.
I can create that one here real quick. So,
yeah, mentalhealthfirstaid.org. Mentalhealthfirstaid.org. What you do is you go to mentalhealthfirstaid.org, the website, and put in your zip code. And they have live classes. And you say how far you're willing to drive, within 25 miles. And they'll tell you when and where all the classes are in that radius in the next 60 days. And it's amazingly inexpensive. I think I took the class live, and it was $25. And they included lunch. So mental health first aid. It's a great mental health 101. You get a binder, and it starts with simple things like depression, and through schizoaffective disorder, bipolar disorder, non-lethal self-harm, pretty much anything you think of in the mental health realm. And they give you a binder with signs, symptoms, solutions, resources, and for $25.
That's great. If you didn't notice, I had to change the scrolling banner down there. My pilot mentality kicked in. I put mentalhealthfirstair.org.
Yeah. Well, and there's another organization, by the way.
Okay.
NAMI, National Alliance.
Yeah, I know them. National
Yes.
Alliance Mental. Yep.
And if you have a family member who has, let's say, schizoaffective disorder, they've got a class, a 12-week class for families of people living with that. And then they also have family to family counseling. So you'll realize you're not alone. There are other families out there dealing with it, and peer-to-peer counseling. And the best thing about NAMI is everything they do is free. So there's probably a NAMI chapter in the county near most anybody who's listening. National Alliance Mental Illness. It's a great organization.
Yeah. So I got them both up there now.
Yep, NAMI.org. Perfect. Yeah, but put in your state or your county, and you'll find. I bet you'll find there's a chapter near you.
Did these classes, did they help you a lot in your keynote speaking?
Yes, absolutely. QPR especially.
Okay.
They've got a PowerPoint slide deck that they insist you use if you're going to teach QPR.
Okay.
And it is unfortunately rather text heavy, but I try to make it come to life with stories on the bullet points on the screen.
Right.
Yeah, I've got a 3-hour suicide prevention CE coming up on March 2nd. I got to cover 3 hours. They're going to get 3 hours of continuing education credit. And I'll lean heavily on the QPR curriculum.
Okay. And how long, you've been doing that how long now again?
Since my first TEDx talk in 2014.
2014. So here I go with my math again. 9 years.
Yeah. Good job. Yes.
Yeah. I don't get into calculus or, algebraic equations or anything like that, but simple multiply or adding, I can't even say it, adding and subtraction, I can do a little bit of.
Yes. Well, and a friend of mine says of algebra, I was good in math until the alphabet got involved.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. So there's a lot of people, we talk about suicide. There's just so many people, and I was one of them, that have thought, never really given suicide much of a thought until I got the phone call about my granddaughter last year. And now it's, it's something that I'm passionate about talking with people about.
Well, I would recommend you go to qprinstitute.com, QPR, yeah, and take their train trainer training, and then use that for the heart and soul of your keynote. The takeaways, learning objectives, what you're going to teach them. Because they teach you the signs and symptoms of depression, thoughts of suicide, what to say and not say, what to do and what not to do, how to find resources in the class. And that's when I keynote, that's what I teach people. I say to them, look, you can make a difference, you can save a life, and you can do it by doing something as simple as we're doing right here. And that is having a conversation if you know how. And I say to the audience, you'll know how before I leave.
And was that qpr.org?
No, it's qprinstitute.com, I believe. qprinstitute.com. Yeah, they got an entry level class for an hour for like $35, and then they got the big train the trainer, which is a little under $500.
There, I got them all up there now.
Yep.
So, and that's one of the things that, I learned the hard way that suicide has an impact on so many people around the world. If you think it will never impact you, that's something you really can't say, because with my granddaughter, we had no idea. We just, no idea.
Well, that's why I train people, because people say they never gave any hints. Well, it's possible they did, because 8 out of 10 people, on average, who are suicidal are ambivalent. And 9 out of 10 give hints in the last week leading up to the attempt. But you have to know what you're looking and listening for. Now, that means 2 out of 10 are not ambivalent, and 1 out of 10 doesn't give hints. But the vast majority of people want to be saved and can be saved if you know what to look and listen for.
Well, let me ask you this then. And I've wondered about this since I lost my granddaughter. she lived in a small town in Nebraska at at the time of her passing. My wife and I flew out there uh, for the funeral, of course, and she was working at this small town swimming pool because she loved swimming. I mean, absolutely loved it. One of my favorite pictures about her is when we took her to Hawaii when she was 12 years old, and we went to one of those attractions, swim with the dolphins, and
Yeah.
we got a picture of her hugging the dolphin, this huge smile on her face, and she just, if it's water, she loved it. So she was working there at the swimming pool, and I wanted to see, someone go to where she'd been that final day.
Mm-hmm.
My wife and I drove out to the swimming pool, and they weren't open. I was standing around. The gentleman who managed it asked if there's anything he could do for me. I told him who I was, and he invited me in to look around. He took me into the snack shack, or whatever it's called, too, because she was about to be made the supervisor of that. And he said her last day there was her best ever. And I just wondered if that could have been one of those triggers.
Not trigger, but sign.
Sign, yes.
Yeah,
Sign.
very dangerous. I talk about it in my keynote. They've been depressed forever or something similar, and all of a sudden, top of the world for no apparent reason. And the reason may be that they've chosen time, place, and method, and they know the pain is coming to an end. What a lot of people don't realize is for most people who are suicidal don't want to die. I didn't want to die. I simply wanted to end the pain. And
Yes.
so she may have been in a great mood and had her best day because she knew time, place, and method. She knew she'd made a decision. She was going to take her life.
Yeah. I wondered if that was the case for her having such a good day at work that
Could
last
be.
day there.
Could be. Something else people don't realize because I hear, it's such a selfish act. Weren't they thinking about the people they're going to leave behind? Well, as a matter of fact, they probably were. It's called burdensomeness. Many people who are suicidal feel the world, their family, their friends, whomever, would be better off without them. So it's almost a selfless act from the inside looking out, selfish from the outside looking in. I knew my wife would be better off financially. That's why I was going to do it, because I had $1 million life insurance policy. We just declared bankruptcy, so she would be restored financially. Okay. I'm thinking, I can fix this. So, weren't you thinking about your wife? Oh, yes. I was thinking she, be brokenhearted, but she'd no longer be broke. So,
yeah.
I know it seems selfish from the outside looking in, but oftentimes it is selfless in that, it's irrational, but they think the world. So I tell people with children, look, if they're living with depression and they occasionally have thoughts of suicide, just every now and then, out of nowhere, say to them, look, I know it's crossed your mind that your mom and I or father and I would be better off without you. In no uncertain terms would we ever be better off without you.
Right. Yeah, it's a topic that needs to be talked about more, in my opinion. Both mental health and suicide awareness. It really does.
Well, here's the thing. One person dies by suicide every 9 to 11 minutes in the U.S., every 40 seconds worldwide. Hardly anybody talks about it. Yep. Unless you bring it up. And dear God, when you bring it up, almost everybody has a story. When you take QPR, they will say, look, you need to do the course, and then you need to allow, let's say, 30 minutes for Q&A. And then you need to make sure you have to promise to set aside another 30 minutes to have individual conversations with the people who line up to talk to you. Because what you do when you go on stage, when I go on stage, is I start the conversation. I give them permission to give voice to their feelings and experiences. So when I'm done, they're lined up. And most conversations start like this. I've never told anybody this. And I say, I get that a lot. I'm on a ship. I'm working a ship. I do stand-up comedy on cruise ships. And I can't find a seat at breakfast. And there's a woman at a table for two, and there's an empty chair. So I point, she nods, I sit. And I'd done a show the night before. She looks up, she goes, hey, are you the comedian? I go, hey, did you like the show? She goes, I love the show. I said that I'm the comedian. Yes, she goes, what would you say if I told you I hated it? They say I look a lot like him. She said, is comedy all you do? I said, no, I'm a public speaker. And if you don't mind me bragging, I just nailed down my first TEDx talk. She goes, what's the topic? I love TEDx talks. I'd had this conversation many times. I thought I knew what was coming. So I said to her, depression and suicide. And I started to count down in my head 3, 2, 1. Sure enough, she goes, Frank, I tried to kill myself twice. We've just met. And she said, first time in college, kind of half hearted, not a big deal. Second time, far more serious. I graduated from college, she said. I had graduated from medical school. I had the knowledge. I had the equipment. Frank, I had the IV started in my ankle. I had the suicide cocktail in one hand, the syringe in the other, getting ready to load it up. And the phone rings. Well, do I get it? I better, because it might be, she said, someone who'd worry come over and interrupt. She picks up the phone. It's her 13-year-old son. She goes, I don't know if he heard something in my voice or had a premonition, but he said, Mom, don't do anything. So I didn't. I didn't give up on the idea of suicide, but I wasn't going to do it that day because I knew he'd always feel guilty. Wasn't there something he could say or do to stop my suicide? And of course, there are things you can say, there are things you can do. So I said to her, well, how old is he now? 21. Does he know his phone call saved your life? She goes, no. How do you start that conversation?
Yeah.
And so the conversation became the theme of my TEDx.
That's great.
And it happens over and over and over. People I've just met tell me the most amazing thing.
Yeah, I had never had a conversation with anyone about suicide before my granddaughter's passing.
Yeah, why would you?
Yeah.
I think mental health should be taught in school, starting in middle school, age appropriate. Your signs, symptoms, that kind of thing, because the sooner you discover you have a problem, the better the long-term outcome. If you catch it in middle school, begin therapy and so forth, then the long-term outcomes are much better.
Exactly. Yeah. I actually got involved with being an advocate for speaking out and helping with mental health in, I think it was 2008. I grounded myself. I was flying charter at the time. I wasn't flying for an airline at the time. I was flying charter. I grounded myself to go on antidepressants. And when I did, of course, at that time, the FAA did not allow any antidepressants whatsoever. That was it. I'm done. As a pilot, I thought I'd never fly again. And out of boredom, my wife says I did this out of boredom since I was home and not working anymore. I got on YouTube. I put a paper bag over my head with the eyes cut out of it, wearing my uniform shirt, and I am the Prozac pilot. I made a video talking about the FAA and antidepressants and depression. In 2011, the FAA authorized 4 different antidepressants.
Good.
As soon as that happened, next thing I know, I'm getting calls from CNN, MSNBC, First Edition or something like that. But I've been on a few different news outlets talking about the FAA and mental health. And the blog now, ProzacPilot.com, that's mine, but I haven't been doing it much lately. So I've started a new one that I'm going to forward all that stuff to. That's I can't even remember the name of it now. FAA pilotmentalhealth.org, I think it is. But so I'm trying to get back out there and doing that with blogging, and then also these podcasts. I'm hoping that this helps somebody.
Oh, I imagine it will. And by the way, instead of blogging, if you want my advice,
what?
I would vlog. I do video blog.
Yes. Yeah.
Because, nowadays,
yeah, I plan on putting like this talk, our discussion today will be up there. That's my hope and plan anyway. But I so admire all the work that you've done. It's so amazing that you're out there doing these things. Thank you.
Thank you. It's my purpose and my passion. And my goal, Collins, is to save a life a day.
I hope I can save at least one at some time.
Who knows? Somebody may be listening or will listen to this podcast. Maybe they've got chronic suicidal ideation and it will become like, what? There's a name for it?
Yeah,
I have
that's
a
wild.
friend who has OCD, and he didn't know that till he was 21. The only diagnosis he ever got before he was 21 was his grandfather who said, that boy screwed up in the head. That was a diagnosis. But he was listening to a radio show, and it was somebody talking about OCD, and they said, we've got a checklist here, 10 things. And if you score above a 5, then, and he checked off all 10. And he said the relief that what he had a name, was a thing, and other people lived with it was, he said, the relief was immense. He just thought he was some kind of freak. But no. And I must tell you, I stayed at his house one night when he wasn't there. I passed through town and told him where the key was. So I stayed at his house. And when he puts his shoes in his closet, Colin, they all point north.
Okay.
And so I went into his closet and I turned every other one south. And so I got an angry phone call. You, I can't believe you.
That sounds like something my father-in-law would have done during his life.
Yeah, I just thought it was a great prank, and he speaks on it. He also speaks on other things, but he speaks because a lot of people live with OCD. Now, here's the thing, Colin. If you have a child with OCD, here's my advice. You need to steer them. You take advantage of it. Wrap your arms. Therapy for the illness, but OCD. There are industries that prize attention to detail. Engineering, architecture, banking, accounting, to the penny.
Right.
Steer them to a career where this thing they have is prized and paid handsomely for. There are 30 Fortune 500 companies now, at least, that are hiring people on the autism spectrum simply for the one thing they do better than anyone else. And these are people who have finally gotten out of their parents' basement because they're being paid well to do something they love. So Microsoft had a program starting in 2015 hiring people on the spectrum. So it's, a neurodiverse workplace where people don't all think alike is a beautiful thing.
Right. That's very interesting. Well, yeah, I told you before we went live here today that my wife is a social worker.
Mm-hmm.
And, so some of her clients are people who have had that are OCD. And I don't know if she's thought of this before. So that's something I'm going to have to tell her. So I'm learning a lot of things here from you today.
Well, and I think one of the TEDx talks I did was called Mental with Benefits, the Evolutionary Advantages of Mental Illness. Because I kept bumping into people who were mentally ill but had some other extraordinary ability. When I got to the end of it, I said, oh, Frank, as if I were the audience, that's really interesting stuff. What do we do with that? I said, here's what you do with it. In the United States, they have something for children called an IEP, Individual Education Plan. I think they should be truly individual. Not only the curriculum, let's say they're dyslexic. Then the STEM program, science, technology, education, mathematics, is just numbers and letters rolling around on a page. Why not steer them into humanities or the arts, where it's not all about numbers and letters, and then steer them into a career where, like OCD, where, people prize and pay well for attention to detail. I think that is the answer for young people, is to figure out what they do well and then put them on that career path.
Yes, absolutely. Do what or you can do this.
Yeah, I mean, I'm functionally unemployable, so I had to tell jokes because nobody would hire me. And you think I'm kidding? I went to Carolina, UNC Chapel Hill. They had a wonderful placement service when you're a senior. I interviewed 77 times, 77 different companies, no callbacks, no job offers. My guess is that the recruiters were really good. They saw me walk in. They thought to themselves, this guy's a clown, and they were right. That's why
was it the big red nose you were wearing when you went in?
Yeah, I mean, 77. I told my first joke in 4th grade at 9 years old. Kids laughed. Teacher was hysterical. That moment, I decided I was going to be a stand-up comedian. Did the talent show in 12th grade, stand-up, won, and hit open mic night after college because my mom made me go to college. And my first 5 minutes on stage in my open mic, halfway through, I heard a voice inside my head. You're home. So
I've
yeah, I believe I was born to it.
I've been on stage doing stand-up comedy, I think 4 or 5 times. And before I went up there, I told you earlier that when I announced rodeos,
Yeah.
I, I I was ready to go. I was ready to get behind that microphone and really ready to do it. No nervousness whatsoever. When I did those stand-up comedy routines, I did an impersonation of Gomer Pyle. You remember Gomer Pyle?
Hey, look, I'm from North Carolina, where Andy Griffith was born, and Mayberry, and yes.
Yeah, so golly. So I did an impersonation of him, and each time I did a good job. But before I went up, each time I felt like I was going to vomit. I was so scared. And that first laugh, then it's like, okay, I'm cool now. So
Yeah, oh yeah. Well, and I opened for Randy Travis one weekend in Michigan in an amphitheater, 5,000 people. Now Randy's got a band and backup singers and lyrics and music. I got a microphone. So I step out on stage, 10,000 eyeballs.
mm-hmm.
Never broke a sweat. Just dived in, and it's after a time, I'd rather do 5,000 than 5 people, because in 5,000 people, Collin, if 3,000 are laughing, that's plenty.
Yeah. Well, then think of America's Got Talent when they first came on during the pandemic. They were playing to nobody, but they're playing to nobody.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So that would be hard.
And
But,
I auditioned for America's Got Talent a couple times. The Last Comic Standing 4 times. I was turned down by the Tonight Show, Conan O'Brien, and the Letterman 12 times. Comedy is a business of rejection.
yeah.
If you can't take rejection, you don't belong in comedy.
Well, one of the times I did stand-up comedy, I opened for the Man in Black, Mr. Cash.
Oh, really?
Yes. Tommy Cash, his brother. he did he did all of Johnny's songs.
Sure.
And, yeah.
As you would.
Yes. So that was at the Grand Grove Opry in Grove, Oklahoma.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so one of the things I did on that one is I was told I was opening up for, I thought I heard Johnny Cash at the Grand Ole Opry, but it was just Tommy Cash at the Grand Grove Opry.
Good choice.
Nobody laughed at that one, though.
Oh, okay.
But now a lot of people use comedy as an outlet for their mental health. Would you say that's what you were doing for a long time?
No, people ask me that. Which came first, comedy or mental illness? Look, I was born with both of them.
Okay.
People say, "Were you born funny?" Yeah, as a matter of fact, an amusing thing happened on the way down the birth canal.
I heard.
Yeah, no, I don't do it as therapy, or I'm just naturally funny. By the way, if somebody's listening and they're thinking about doing stand-up comedy, people always ask me, "How do you get started?" And I said, "Well, here's what I would do. Here's what I did. I went to open mic night twice and just watched. And 75% of the people were so bad. I thought to myself, I'm funnier than that just walking around. Gave me the courage to get up and, do my 5 minutes. So, yeah, I think it's part and parcel of my mental illness, the way my brain is wired. I can teach you to write, stand up, and perform it. What I cannot teach you to do is process the incoming information the way my crazy brain does.
Okay.
Comedians are really paid to listen and observe and report. I'm on a plane. There's a woman, a flight attendant, the day before they had changed the FAA regulations. You could now use your iPhone or iPad on takeoff or landing as long as it was in the airplane mode.
Right.
The problem for the flight attendant is this is not written down anywhere. She's got to ad lib this part. So she goes through it was Delta, so a very southern flight attendant. She goes through the oxygen mask, forward path lighting, seat cushion. She gets to this part. She goes, ladies and gentlemen, due to new FAA regulation, she freezes. You can almost hear her thinking. She gets inspired. Due to new FAA regulation, if you have small equipment, you can continue playing with it. I'm bent over double in my seat, laughing. My seatmate thinks I've lost my mind because nobody else on the plane is laughing. He goes, what? I go, let's review. Before I can review, she comes back on and goes, you have large equipment. You have to shove that on the seat in front of you. So I'm down on my knees. So I was the only one on the plane who processed it that way. Everybody heard it, but my brain flipped it around into, a joke instantly. So it's like somebody, there's like the valve in there and they just tore the knob off. It never stops. I mean, I'm not on 24/7. I've got friends like that who can't stop. I can be serious. I can be quiet. My brain's always processing
Right.
things around me.
Now, I asked you that question about comedy and mental health. It's something that I've heard anyway, a lot of times, that there's so many people that are comedians that are really funny, but behind the laughter in the face.
Oh yeah, no, the comedians have a higher rate of suicide than the average individual.
Really?
A number of friends of mine have died by suicide, and comedians. And it's that I think it's that you have to strike a balance between the mental illness and the mental ableness, and sometimes it gets out of balance and they end their lives, unfortunately. And it's not just comedians, entertainers, authors. People in the creative field tend to have a higher rate of suicide than just the average human.
Okay. Now it's the told you the premise of my podcast, The Miracles of Tragedy.
Yeah.
And so let's go back to, you were talking about your family, if we could, please.
Yeah.
And could you please, who was it that you said that you found?
My mother found my grandmother. My mother and I found my great aunt.
Okay.
And it was horrific. Should warn the audience, what I'm about to tell you, I don't want anybody to get triggered by this. If you'd like me to tell you the story, I will. But it is horror movie horrible, especially for a 4-year-old. Yes. My mother couldn't reach my great aunt on the phone, and given the family history and my grandmother's experience, my mother got panicked, so she bundled me into the car and we drove over to my great aunt's apartment. My mom let us in, nothing out of place until we got to the kitchen. In the kitchen, on the counter, was all the food that should have been in the refrigerator. It was an old lock type refrigerator, not with a magnetic strip. It had a latch. The kind, if you get into and pull the door to, you can't get out. And that's what my great aunt had done. She decided to end her life. She got in the refrigerator, pulled the door closed, and apparently at some point changed her mind and tried to claw her way out. So my mother, not realizing this, me holding onto her skirt tail, walks over, opens the door, and my great aunt fell out and pinned me to the floor. We're face to face. Her face froze in that last moment of horror. So that's why I screamed for days. And that's,
I couldn't even begin to imagine.
Yeah, and I say, when you're that close to suicide, and I don't think you can get any closer, the odds of you seriously considering it later go up.
My daughter found her child. And yeah, I won't go into the details on that, but the room she found her in, my daughter works from home. She's teaches literature and does it online with some different colleges.
Yeah.
And her office is on the other side of the room that my granddaughter died in. So she has to walk to that room every day.
Okay.
They've just bought another house in a different town. We talk about stigma. My daughter says when she walks through town, people look at her and says, oh, that's the mother of the girl that killed herself.
Yeah.
She can just see it in her face, she says. So
Oh yeah, stigma continues.
yeah, so she don't want to get not only wants to get away from walking through that room, but also the stigma that she's feeling.
Yeah, because a lot of people think it's the parents' fault. They could have done something. They blame. Yeah, it's I can see why she'd like to get out of town.
Now, I told you beforehand the miracles, the good things that have come into my life due to tragedies like this, with my daughter dying, son-in-law dying, my granddaughter dying, and all the different things good that has come through it. Now, with you and the things that you've seen in your life, especially that horrific event, can you think of anything that comes to mind that you would call a miracle that came out of that, or
Well,
something
I,
really positive?
I the family obviously has a history of depression and suicide. I was that close to suicide. I came close to killing myself. I have two mental illnesses, but I've been able to take all that and turn it into keynote speaking and 9 TEDx talks, and conceivably changed and/or saved lives. So I think that's my living legacy, is the people that maybe might not be here had they not had a chance to hear me speak, or even on YouTube, or
Right.
every now and then I'll get a DM on Twitter, or a message on YouTube about somebody who was close perhaps to dying by suicide, or just terribly depressed, thinking they're the only ones in the world, and they come across one of my videos and they're like, oh my gosh, I'm not the only one. So I think
That's
that's the
great.
miracle of taking.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely. That's what I'm hoping to do with this podcast, is to give people hope, especially in today's world. With all the things that are going on today, a lot of people, I think, have lost track that there still is good and hope and love in the world.
sure.
And that's one of the things I'm trying to get out there through these, with people like you. And I'm so grateful that you've come onto my podcast with me. And in wrapping things up, what would you say to give somebody, what would be the most inspirational thing that Fred King, the
Frank.
mental health comedian, could say to somebody who's really, really down in the dumps and doesn't know where to turn?
Well, I would say get an evaluation, find out why you're down in the dumps, what exactly you're dealing with. Uh, I would say also that the doctor only knows about medication what the drug salesman told him. So there's now a DNA cheek swab test. You take your DNA like Ancestry, you send it in, and they will send you a very short list of, let's say, antidepressants that will work best with your metabolism. They take your DNA. That way, there's a lot less experimentation. Go on, doesn't work, taper off. Go on, doesn't work, taper off. And have a physical. Because sometimes physical problems present as mental health issues. A friend of mine here in town was terribly depressed, and they went to the doctor and they did a full workup. It turns out his body wasn't metabolizing iron properly. So they put him on a time release iron supplement, and boom, depression gone. So I would say
Interesting. Yeah.
mental health evaluation, a physical, and also share with anybody you know, love, and trust what you're going through. Let them know and let them know how they can help, because they can't help if they don't know.
Yeah. That gets back to the stigma.
Yeah.
And it's sad that there's so much stigma out there about mental health.
Yeah. Well, that part of my job is start the conversation, break the silence, break the stigma.
Frank,
People have an idea what mental illness looks and sounds like when they see me on stage, and comedian, relatively high performing, with mental illness. Wrote for Tonight Show for 20 years, been doing stand up for 37. It's like cognitive dissonance. They can't hold the guy on the corner with the sign that says "We'll work for food" and the picture of me on stage being funny in the same. You know what I mean?
right.
So try and change perceptions. You can change prejudices.
Right.
That's my job, is to show people that people said to me, like I told you, I don't know anybody with mental illness. Yes, you do. They just haven't told you yet.
Exactly. Once again, Frank, thank you so much for being with me today.
Yeah.
And everyone, I just want to share, as I've tried to already, is that there is love in the world. You just got to know where to find it. And if you don't have anyone near you that can show you that love, go somewhere where there is some love. If you're feeling bad enough, don't forget there's a new number recently out in the United States for the suicide hotline.
Took forever.
988. So all
Yeah.
you got to do is call text or call
Yeah.
988.
Yeah. It took forever to get that done, to get that
Yes, but
3-digit number.
finally, 988, if you need anyone. If you don't wanna do that, you can't talk to anybody at home, go down the street, go to a church, go to a synagogue, go to a mosque, go to a youth center, anywhere where you can find somebody that will say that you are worthwhile, that your life is worth something, and that you are loved. Once again, thank you for joining us on the Miracles of Tragedy.